Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring that bell to stay updated on all things big tech careers. Today we're going to be talking about the interview process for an Amazon business analyst, of which I have been one. So let's get started. So the Amazon Business Analyst assessment and interview process typically consists of about 4 or 5 rounds. There's the recruiter phone screen first, and that's just them reaching out and making contact and saying, we got your information. We'd like to look at you as a candidate. Let's set up the process. And that next step will be an actual technical interview. So they'll connect you with another business analyst, somebody who's already done the role, or perhaps somebody who manages people who do the role, run you through your paces and make sure that you actually know what you're doing and that you have the chops to work at Amazon. Then the next round will be the hiring manager interview, and that will consist of the actual formal interview that we're going to be going over, practicing a little bit in a minute here. Hiring manager is going to make sure you're a good fit for the role. You already have the technical skills. They cleared that up, that you're going to be a good part of the team, that you're going to fit in nicely at Amazon. Final round, and it may be, actually 2 of these, but there will be like an on-site type of loop where they'll bring you around, they'll show you around the office and introduce you to some folks. You might have an additional interview with another hiring manager who's just doing some diligence, extra work, or perhaps somebody who's a little bit higher up who wants to make sure you're going to be a good member on their team. And then you'll be evaluated as you go through all of these steps at every step of the process on Amazon's 16 leadership principles. And these test your ability to think critically, solve problems, and work effectively with others. There's also a lot of customer focus. That's very important to Amazon. And they also have values in here about being frugal and developing yourself and learning things and earning trust. And I encourage you to find this site. Just do a quick internet search for Amazon's 16 leadership principles. They've got it publicly available. We can put a link in the description too. Before you start each interview, go back through this list and ask yourself, what am I going to say that is going to harken back to one of these leadership principles? Because these are the things that they think about day in and day out. Is how can they improve themselves? How can they build a better product? How can they take ownership for things? How can they be critical? All of these things. So think about how you're going to answer those questions as you go through each stage of the interview. All right, so here's the big question, right? Average salary for an Amazon business analyst. Well, it can be anywhere from about $90,000 to up to $300,000 annually, depending on the role level and location and responsibilities. To excel in this role, you're going to need a few things, right? You're going to need some data analysis skills. That's obvious, right? Excel, SQL, data visualization software. Those of you with experience in Tableau or Power BI, that's great. I encourage everyone to look into QuickSight. That's Amazon's program. So you want to know how to use it. It's very intuitive, very simple, feature rich. Definitely want to be familiar with that at least. SQL skills. So you'll want to be able to write complex queries and optimize their performance. You'll need to be able to do things like check out code, publish code, push code, manage reviews, that sort of thing. They have a lot of products. They have a lot of customers. There's going to be some huge data sets, so you'll need to be able to fine tune those queries and make sure that they can run optimally on large data sets. You will need a little statistical analysis. It's pretty common that they have quantitative analysts who will handle the heavy lifting with a lot of the statistical stuff. But from a business analyst standpoint, you still want to know how to do it. You want to know how to manage the right kinds of averages and the right kinds of functions that properly calculate the kinds of business questions that you'll be answering, which brings me to business acumen. You are a business analyst, you are good with data, but you need to be good with business too. A well-informed business specialist or business systems analyst even would be able to tell you exact requirements for the kind of information they want you to go analyze and the types of insights they're hoping to discover by this. But that's like 1 in 100. You're not going to get that very often. Sometimes you're going to get a vague description. We need to understand something, XYZ blank, and you need to understand how the business operates in order to be able to render that information. When I was a business analyst, I was in charge of 12 of the productivity services under AWS. While I was fully capable of analyzing these data sets and creating visualizations on them, I had to spend my first month or two learning about each product and how it actually worked, so that when I saw that information represented in the data sets, I knew what I was doing with it. So definitely need to have some business acumen in there to help you understand what's going on. So those are just some general, categories of things that you're going to need to excel here. If you're watching this video, I'm guessing you probably already have a lot of these. That's great. So what we'll do next is we'll jump into some example questions to help you get prepared for the types of things they ask you and, how you want to look impressive. All right. Let's dive into some common behavioral interview questions you might encounter for the Amazon Business Analyst position. These questions, they typically help interviewers understand how you handle real-world scenarios and challenges. They want to find out, if you encounter a scenario like this while you're working for us, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to freeze up, or do you already have a solution based on your experience, or do you have at least an idea of what you would do with this kind of thing? So I'm going to read these off screen here for a second. First question. So can you describe a time when you had to make a data-driven decision that impacted the business? When you respond to this, you want to make sure that you share a specific example of where you use data to drive a decision. Explain the context, the data that you analyzed, the decision that you made, and the outcome. You want to show that you were able to wrangle some data, some information, to inform a decision maker that they could confidently do something or should shy away from doing something. An example of this might be surfacing customer data aggregated and categorized in such a way that you expose a weak point in demographical sales so that the advertising and marketing department can go after that demographic, perhaps with a new product or a new feature or some kind of cost reduction or something like that. That would be driving a business decision. Next, how do you manage and prioritize tasks when juggling multiple high priority projects? So talk about your approach to time management. Be specific. Mention any tools or methods that you use to prioritize tasks or handle deadlines to make sure the project gets the attention that it needs. For example, one place that I work was an Office 365 shop, and so we leveraged Azure DevOps, and I used the boards, acting as a Scrum Master in addition to being an analyst, to create epics, features, stories, and tasks for all the work that needed to get done. And it was coordinated so that there was predecessor and successor relationships, so that we knew that when one task got done, what task was supposed to happen next, or that in order to get to this high priority task that has a due date, there is another one that needs to be completed first. And so someone needs to be assigned to that one this sprint in order to meet our timelines. What I just described to you, those 2 or 3 sentences, is a perfect answer to that interview question. You could even describe something about how you used some kind of to-do list application, third party or otherwise, that helps you stay on top of your list of tasks and what you need to do. One thing that people often forget when they're preparing for this question, though, is talk about how you adapt to when an outside influence interferes with your project management. What do you do in the scenario where you're moving along at the speed of light and then something happens that changes the plan? How do you course correct? How do you stay on task? How do you handle that kind of scenario? Make sure you have an answer for that. Or even if they don't ask it, describe that, because they want to make sure that you're able to get to that deadline, to get to that completion point. Let's do one more. Tell me about a time when you identified an inefficiency in a process and how you addressed, again, provide examples, right? When a process could have been improved and you did something to improve it, detail that. If you don't have an example from your professional past, think of something in your personal life. That's fine too. Just describe how you recognized that there was something that needed improvement or could be improved, how you analyzed the issue, the solution that you proposed, and who to or how or what benefits or positive reasons you gave for enacting the plan to do so, and the actual impact of your intervention. So make sure you cover all of those things. Don't just say, well, I improved this one reporting process by streamlining the code. That's not a good enough answer, right? Say something like, well, I identified that there was a process in the code that was taking longer than it needed to because it was aggregating over more fields than we were actually using in the final report. So I was able to reduce the production time of that report generation by such and such percent. That's a good answer right there. And, some general tips. Have you heard of this STAR method? It's situation, task, action, result. Describe your answers that way. Mention what the scenario was, the situation, what was going on, what task you actually came up with to do or had to do in order to solve the problem. And then once you figured out that task, what action did you take? How did you actually enact that task? How did you take care of the problem? And what was the result? How much did it improve? How much time was saved? How much money was saved? How much manual review was saved? Make sure that you're specific with these types of things. All right. So that's some typical interview questions and answers. And remember, as you're going through all of these things, you want to keep in mind those 16 leadership principles as well, right? And I've already covered a couple in some of the example answers that I gave. Go back through the list, go pull up the 16 leadership principles list and see if you can identify which ones I answered to in some of my examples. Now let's walk through a few easy to medium to difficult Amazon SQL questions that you'll get during the interview process. And when you're going through these, what I want you to remember is first, understand the requirement for each question. Like, make sure you understand what they're describing they need, and don't be afraid to ask a question about that requirement if it's unclear or if you need something that's more specific in order to answer that question. And secondly, explain your thought process. Be detailed. Discuss how you would solve the problem. You don't necessarily, unless you're in the middle of the technical interview where you're actually writing code, you don't necessarily need to describe the code that you're going to write, although they may ask you to reference how would you write that query, and what they mean by that is, what would you use? Particular joins, a windowed function, an aggregate with a group by. You can be somewhat general there. You don't have to describe the code completely, but you do want to mention what methods and tools you would use in order to solve the problem. So let's take a look at a few. Okay, we'll start with an easy one, units per factory. So the CEO of your company is looking to expand the facilities and asks you to write a query to find how many units per factory there are across all the different factories. We've got a schema here that we can identify and some table data. Now, this is going to be a pretty simple one. Here's the expected output, factory by total units. So all we really need to do is select the factory and a sum of the units as total units from factory inventory. And what do we need to do in order to get the sum by factory? We need to group by factory. If we run this, it looks right, so we'll check the answer. Now, the reason why I think this is a good example, although it's very simple, it's very easy, what they're effectively asking you to do with this question is think on your feet and quickly solve the problem using standard SQL syntax. Just a quick aggregate, and remember to add the group by and be done with it. But you can actually take your time with this one and say, I want to group by the factory. I know I need to use an aggregate function to sum up the total units, and that should give me the results that we're looking for. It doesn't specify in the requirements to do that by product, which is why I only grouped by the factory. So you can take a moment to just explain your reasoning here. You could even go into more elaborate detail and say something like, I would further ask the requester or the stakeholder, what is the purpose of knowing the units per factory? Do we need to compare that against any sort of storage space data, or is it helpful to group that by product because different products are stored at different storage rates, etc.? You could demonstrate a little innovation that way. Okay, next we're going to start with a slightly harder one because this one involves working with dates. So Amazon SQL question, number of times to solve. Schema here, a couple of tables. Write a query to find the number of times each question was solved and the total minutes needed in the month of December 2018, order by question ID. So they've bolded out the things they want, the number of times and the total minutes. Those are going to be our metrics that we're going to try to pull out of here. Looking at the questions table and the members table, I'm going to go ahead and say, the members table looks like we've got users who took a question ID and the number of minutes and the time that they did it. we don't really need this sort of meta information about the questions themselves necessarily. And they have an expected output. So this one is labeled as hard, but it's actually not that hard. We're just going to select the question ID from the members table. Like I said, we just need the information about those questions that were taken and how long they took. And looking back, we need to say, okay, find the number of times. So what we'll do is we'll count the user IDs who took the question, and we'll call that count because of the expected output. And I'm putting that in double quotes because count is a reserved word and we want to use it as a label, so we're just being safe. And then we also need to get the total minutes needed, and that's pretty straightforward. The total minutes for each question, they're not asking us to average it out by user or anything like that. So just say a sum of the minutes as total minutes from members, and that should get us where we need to be for this particular query. Now, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to group by that question ID in order to get all these aggregates. And per our requirements, we want to order it by the question ID, ascending being the default there. Now, we were asked to do this for the month of December 2018, and my favorite way to do that is, we just add a quick where clause here. I'm going to use a date trunk, and if you don't know date trunk, what it does is it reduces it down to the interval you specify. In this case, I'm going to say month, and we'll do that for the start time that we see right over here is equal to 2018 1201, because what date trunk does is it reduces it down to the interval, in this case the month. So no matter what these are, 2018 1204 is going to be reduced to 2018 1201 00000 as the default, and so will 07 and so will 11. So we should get these three. What we'll do is we'll run this query and just see how it matches the output. Notice I'm not checking the answer right away. I'm not so arrogant that I think I got it correct the first time, but it does look like I did. So we'll check the answer. All right, we've got a correct answer. So the reason why I included this one is because it forces you to work with dates. And in Postgres, you want to make sure you understand how dates are formatted and what date fields are available. The website, postgres.org/docs/current/functions-datetime.html. That'll give you in fact, let's just pull that up on screen here, the full breakdown of how I'm using these date functions. So for example, I used this date trunk right here, and that'll explain how everything works with that. So make sure you understand how you're working with your information, your dates. It should get you through the exam, and make sure you take a moment to explain, I just did the requirements, right? The number of times and the total minutes, how many total minutes. You might suggest to somebody, a stronger analysis might include average number of minutes per user or average number of minutes. That's a different metric, right? If it's per user, it's telling you how many times over the multiple times an individual user took the test did they need on average to solve it. But if you just go average minutes instead of some minutes, you can say, well, this is on average how much time it takes anyone to solve this question. Maybe that's a more valuable metric. Anyway, some food for thought. All right, and finally, we're going to do employees who earn the second highest in each department. Our requirement is write a query to find the list of employees who earn the second highest in each department. Return the employee ID, first and last name, and depart order by employee ID ascending. So we know we want these four fields first, or these three fields. Employee ID, so let's select those. Select employee ID, first name, last name. According to our desired output here, we want the department as well from employee. Now we need to find the second highest salary. So what we should do is we should row number or preferably rank these salary entries. And this is a windowed function. So we're going to say over what? We're going to partition by department because we want to rank them by each department. We'll order that ranking by salary ascending, and we'll call that rank in quotes because rank is a reserved word. Now I'm going to take that out for just a second and we'll run this. And we'll say, okay, well, we get the list of fields that we want. Great. But if we put it back in with the rank function, now they're ranked within each department according to highest to lowest salary. So we got Luke Smith in the DS department, looks like, 28,000 out of DS. So he's lowest. So we actually want to do this descending because we want our numbers going highest to lowest, right? I put that in there on purpose so that we could see. You want to remember how these things function, right? So if we run that again, now in the DS department, Tara Glad is in first place, and she has 32,000 above everybody else in DS, 28 and 31.7. So we've got our good rankings there. Now, we only want the people ranked second from this subset, we'll call it. And what we're going to do is we'll put that in a common table expression, a CTE. So we'll call it ranked. And this is going to basically make it like a subquery. Like it's going to be a query that gets executed in memory so that you can use it again for something else. So we'll select everything that we know we're going to need: employee ID, first name, last name, and department from our CTE. But we only need where the rank is equal to 2. That's really all there is to it. Okay, so we've got the correct people here. We just need to add our order by employee ID ascending, and our output should match. Let's check it to make sure it's correct, even though we can clearly see that it is. Excellent. We've got a correct answer. Now, this one we picked here because of the windowed function, the rank that you need to use in order to get this correct. Make sure you understand this one here because it's definitely very important. It's going to be used a lot. Now, one other thing that I want to say about this list of requirements, though, and remember I mentioned, be thorough, ask questions, understand your list of requirements, right? Find the list of employees. What's your definition of employee is the question I would ask here. Because Hector Bush is employee ID 1 and his manager ID is 1. Kim Stewart is employee ID 2 and her manager ID is 1. That's Hector Bush. So Hector Bush is definitely a manager. Luke Smith has a manager ID of 7, which means that Linda Bruss must be a manager, but she's got a manager ID of 5, which means that John Free must be a manager, who has a manager ID of 1, which means Hector. So we could actually form a hierarchical tree here of who's the manager of who. And when they say employee, do they just mean everyone? Or should we exclude managers of a certain level? Should we look at only people who don't have others reporting to themselves, etc.? That would complicate the query, but if you ask that kind of question during the interview, they're going to see that you understand your requirements must be specific and there are nuances that you want to ask. All right, that sounds good to me. All right, and with that, here's some final tips to help you prepare. First of all, practice regularly, right? Use platforms like Big Tech Interviews and HackerRank or SQL problems that you can actively solve. Watch some of the other videos that we've got and go through how to actually solve some of these query problems and make sure you're constantly working at it. If you have the ability, run a local SQL server of any flavor you like, Microsoft T-SQL, Azure, Postgres, NoSQL, Mongo, whatever you got, run it locally. It's usually free. It's very cheap to buy the equipment if you need it, and be practicing, use them for all kinds of things. I have over a dozen local databases and for various purposes, lots of application projects, but I started off doing a financial program. I wanted to do my budgeting in a database because I knew how to handle SQL and Excel, and that was easier for me than using something like QuickBooks or another checkbook app. Also, review fundamentals, your basics in data analysis and SQL business concepts. Make sure those are all solid. Make sure that you're coming to the game to play. You understand what you need to do, why you need to do it, and what you're there for. Also, understand Amazon's business, right? Go and look at the 16 leadership principles, but also just familiarize yourself with their products. Explore AWS, especially because they integrate a lot with AWS, and figure out what kind of apps and products they have there, and get familiar with what they are and what they do and who Amazon's working with as well. That's a good one. And mock interviews, practice with friends or online, video mock interviews with somebody. Use services like BTI, find some way to simulate the interview experience. We went through a few questions here. Find somebody you can talk back and forth with, especially if you have a friend or acquaintance who happens to work in HR, because they may not be able to interview you directly for the role you're interested in, but they will know how to interview you. So it's a great practice experience. So all these fundamentals, just make sure you're super solid on these. Very important. All right, well, that's a wrap on our guide to acing the Amazon Business Analyst interview. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up, share it, leave a comment if you have questions or topics that you want covered in the next video. Good luck with your interview preparation, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey, don't forget to check out these videos and subscribe to our channel for more tech career tips and tutorials.